What's going on, guys? My name is Wade with TechDaily, and in this video, we're going to be doing a camera comparison test between the new Samsung Galaxy M31 and the Samsung Galaxy M30S. If you don't already know, the M31 received some pretty major and heavily advertised camera upgrades that contributed to Samsung nicknaming this device its Mega Monster, which is in reference to the 64 megapixel main lens. And with the claims and marketing hype surrounding it, I figured at a bare minimum, I definitely wanted to put this new phone to the test to see just how good of a picture taker it really is. And I also want to see if it's a significant upgrade over the M30S. This phone, after all, packs some pretty beefy camera specs of its own, and it was released just a few months ago too. So I'm sure that if you have the M30S, you might be thinking about upgrading, or at least wondering if it's worth it to go with the M31. And I hope that this video might be helpful in that important decision. So like I do with all my camera comparisons, I want to take just a minute to go over the hardware specs and feature differences that these phones have so you can get an idea of what you're working with. If you aren't really interested in that stuff, feel free to just jump ahead in the video or look for the timestamp I left in the comments. Starting with last year's M30S. This phone offers 3 camera lenses around back. There's a really impressive 48 megapixel f2.0 aperture main shooter, an 8 megapixel ultra wide camera, and the 5 megapixel depth sensing lens for those live focus shots. Now, honestly, I think these specs are already pretty good. And keep in mind too, that this phone came out in September of last year. It's barely 6 months old, so it isn't an outdated or out-spec'd phone by any means. But with the new M31, Samsung decided not only to bump up the specs quite a bit, but also throw in an additional lens just for good measure. This new device's 4-lens setup includes that monstrous 64 megapixel f1.8 aperture main lens, similar 8 megapixel ultra wide and 5 megapixel depth sensing lenses, and a new 5 megapixel macro lens for snapping some super up close pictures. And the changes extend to the front facing camera as well. The older M30S has a still pretty respectable 16 megapixel f2.0 selfie lens, but the M31 goes twice the distance with a 32 megapixel f2.0 front camera and the added ability to shoot 4K video, which is awesome. Now, as far as their features and functions, as far as I can tell, there's nothing new or added or updated with the M31. The differences you see here have to do with the M30S running Android 9 and the M31 running Android 10. So the UI is changed up just a bit, but you'll find all the same options and shooting modes. There's pro controls, night mode, super slow-mo video, hyperlapse, and more. The only sort of extra shooting mode on the M31 is macro, of course, but that's because we do get that additional macro lens, obviously. Now, one thing I want to mention, in order to take full advantage of all those monstrous megapixels, you want to make sure that you have the shooting mode selected, and this is the same across both phones. Otherwise, you're just shooting with 16 megapixels and 12 megapixels on the M31 and M30S. Still totally fine, but you're not quite getting the full experience. So let's go ahead and jump into some picture and video samples. And in regards to the pictures, sometimes I went with the full shooting capabilities at max megapixels, and other times I just went with the default option. And I'll have them labeled for each so that you know. Now, a couple of constant things I noticed across these samples. While the M30S can still take great shots, when compared to the M31 in any shooting mode, the two big differences I saw were in the image processing and the detail. The M30S often overcompensates. It saturates, it brightens, and ultimately takes the real-world shot and fluffs it up a bit. The M31, on the other hand, seems to stay true to what you actually see, even if it tends to look a bit more dull or dim. For me personally, I usually tend to like that brighter, saturated look, but in the case of the M30S, I think it's overdone, and the M31 looks more pleasing. There's also the matter of the subtle details. The M31 is of course able to capture the little things in every picture much more than the M30S can. Keep in mind, we're dealing with the same Exynos 9611 processor inside each phone, so I think most of what's going on here has to do with that difference in camera hardware more than anything. When the lights go down, I think once again, the biggest factor here is the exposure. The M31 I think is comfortable leaving things a bit darker because it can still pull a lot of detail out, while the M30S almost seems to overcompensate and brighten the image up quite a bit. It almost sort of loses the fact that it's a nighttime shot in night mode when it becomes so overexposed. Now, when we move over to the front-facing camera, I actually think this is where we find one of the biggest improvements. The M30S has this really noticeable smoothing effect that makes me look porcelain, while the M31 captures so much more detail and overall gives a more realistic image. The M31 also nails down skin tone quite a bit better too, and honestly, I guess I never considered the M30S to be so terrible of a selfie taker, but compared to the new M31, the difference is like night and day. So I have a bunch more picture and video samples that I want to show you guys, and I'll sort of just let them play through here for a bit. I hope you enjoy them. Definitely let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and I'll meet you guys up at the end of this video. So there you go. That's everything you need to know about the cameras on the M30S and the new M31. I think overall, the M31 is actually a pretty decent improvement over last year's phone, and it's certainly deserving of the hype Samsung has given it. Keep in mind, we're talking about $250 phones here that are doing this, and all in all, I'm super impressed. The M31 really does a pretty awesome job. But don't let me persuade you. Let me know what you guys honestly think in the comments down below. Do you think the M31 took some decent shots, or is it not too much of an upgrade? Either way, hopefully you guys did enjoy this video. Be sure to follow TechDaily on Twitter and subscribe to the TechDaily YouTube channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys later.